So you've been working on your British English pronunciation and intonation, whether that's through these weekly videos on my YouTube channel or through other channels, or maybe from the materials over on my website, englishpronunciationroadmap.com. And you're probably making progress and you're building in new ways of saying these English words. But the challenge that most of my students face is that moment where they're in live conversation and they go to speak and use these new pronunciations and new ways of using intonation, and they come unstuck and they tend to use the old habits that they have built from their first language. And it's understandable because live speech is a spontaneous thing. How do you know what you're going to say and what words exactly you're going to use and in what specific order? You don't, because you're aware of the other person, you're listening to their content, and you're aware of the circumstances. So it's complicated, and my students ask me every single week, how do I get over that hurdle? How do I get over that block of sort of using the skills that I'm building in live speech? And I guess there are different ways in, depending on the type of person that you are. And you may have already tried this, but one way that I found that's particularly useful is to take the guessing out of live speech. What I mean is not to be rehearsing your conversations. I mean, that's impossible, but to be considering and thinking about the types of phrases that you use on a daily basis. And trust me, when you start to do this, you'll discover that you're using the same phrases over and over and over again every single day, every single week, every single month. And so there's an opportunity not to know what you're going to say in live speech, but when those phrases come up, to have rehearsed them, to have rehearsed the pronunciation, to have rehearsed the stress in the sentence, to have rehearsed the intonation in the sentence. So for instance, a lot of people might find themselves saying, I'm going to work, or what time are you back from work, or would you like a cup of tea, or I'm going to bed now, or dinner's ready. These little phrases that you may not think of them as being, the most important phrases, and I'm sure that in a professional capacity, you're using varied language all day long, but even in a professional context, you're probably using similar phrases, what's the deadline, or I've got a meeting in half an hour, or or anything, any kind of phrase that you're using, any kind of technical language that you might be using on a daily basis. And to write down those phrases, maybe you just start with 5, maybe you start with 10, and you build and build and build, and you rehearse those phrases. Now, of course, the problem is, how do I know how to pronounce the words in that phrase, and how do I know how to stress the right words, and how do I know what the right intonation is? And I guess, well, you don't. And one option, if it's available to you, is to find a willing native friend and I don't know, maybe just listen out to the way that they use those phrases, or ask them directly if you're bold enough and say, look, I'm working on my pronunciation, and how would you say, dinner's ready, or how would you say, I'm off to work now? And maybe even record them and listen back and tune into the way that they're using pronunciation, stress, and intonation. Failing that, you could pick the words apart. So if you had the phrase, I'm going to bed now, you could check in a pronunciation dictionary and look up all of the phonetic transcription. If you're on Oxford dictionaries, they give you the audio as well. And you can listen to the way in which they pronounce those words. You may not get the intonation and the stress, but you'll be getting the pronunciation of those individual words, and you'll be halfway there. I guess another option is to call on someone like me, a voice coach, someone who deals in accent reduction or elocution or British English pronunciation, and have an initial session and just find out what it is that is stopping you from speaking British English confidently and fluently, and change some of those habits and run those phrases. I've got a lady from Spain at the moment, and she comes every week with about 10 or 15 different phrases that she knows that she's using every day, and she's making great progress because she's taking the guesswork out of live conversation, and that might be a really useful way of thinking about stepping up in your work on British English pronunciation and intonation. So if you found that useful and you're on my YouTube channel, then subscribe. There's weekly videos here. You could also head over to my website, englishpronunciationroadmap.com. There's a load of free materials, a load of videos. There's some free downloads. There's an ebook, British English Pronunciation Roadmap, my ebook that I published last year. That is available to purchase. So there's a lot of free stuff over there. Go and check it out, and I'll speak to you soon.